Save for Nintendo, I don't believe there is another company that has had such a rich and storied history than id Software. This company has shaped the industry by pushing the boundaries of what computer hardware can do, as well as create entire genres of games. While the company as a whole has changed this industry to what it is today, the brains behind it is the legend himself, John Carmack. I think it's safe to say that without this man, video games wouldn't be anywhere near the quality of today's work. This man has created 3D programs that broke molds and made careers. While it's one thing to create fantastic 3D programs, it was completely groundbreaking what Carmack did with it. He was able to manipulate the inner workings of the PC to take advantage of every bit of processing power and byte of memory, which produced results that looked hardware generations ahead of its time. But what I personally think is John Carmack's greatest contribution to the industry is allowing others to use his code. I remember watching his induction into the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame when he said this quote,
"I really do enjoy being able to provide kind of a canvas for other people to work on. And if somebody else can take what I've provided as an infrastructure and go and do something really cool and wonderful on top of that, I just take a pure positive out of that where I'm very pleased and happy whenever anybody can do something wonderful that I've been a part of."
It's that kind of selflessness that makes John Carmack stand out among his peers. While some people would protect what they created to give themselves a leg up on the competition, Carmack said, "Take what I created and use it to push the industry forward." Through this way of thinking, not only have we received such games as Half-Life, but because of the modding capabilities of the engines, we got all of its fan-made games such as Counter-Strike. And to truly understand the impact of this company, I believe we need to dive into its history. Before id Software was officially founded, John Carmack, John Romero, Adrian Carmack, no relation to John Carmack, and Tom Hall worked for a computer company called Softdisk, where they produced small games on a monthly basis. But one night, in standard John Carmack fashion, he instantly came up with a much more efficient and faster way of producing graphics for side-scrolling games. Seeing this new way of producing games, Romero and Carmack decided to start up a side project using all of their free time to replicate Super Mario Bros. 3 using the main character from Romero's previous game, Dangerous Dave. They hoped to eventually license it to Nintendo, but the Big N shot them down, saying they had no interest in porting their games to the PC. It was about this time that the founder of Apogee Software, which would later become 3D Realms, Scott Miller, attempted to contact Romero regarding a job offer. But because this was at a time where programmers, especially gifted ones, were in short supply, companies guarded their talent as much as their bank accounts. Miller had to be careful in his attempt to talk to Romero, so he devised a sneaky way of trying to contact him. He sent numerous fan letters under false names to Romero regarding his previous game, Dangerous Dave. Once Romero noticed all of these letters were coming from the same address, he responded back. Miller asked if Romero and Carmack could make some shareware games for Apogee on the side. As a result, they created Commander Keen, a side-scroller in the same vein as Super Mario. But because this was a secret side project, Carmack and Romero had to borrow company computers to work on it. Once the game was finished, it was sent to Apogee, where it became a hit. Soon, Softdisk found out about the little side project and recommended that they leave and form their own company. The corporate board at Softdisk knew the talent they had on their hands with Carmack and Romero, and threatened to resign if they got rid of the programmers. So, through a legal agreement, Romero and Carmack would put their attention toward Apogee and create games on the side for Softdisk. As a result, id Software was born. Now that they had their own company, Commander Keen became id's first official game, even though technically Romero had created Dangerous Dave 3 years earlier. Commander Keen was the story of Billy Blaze, a brilliant 8-year-old who created a starship in his backyard called the Beans with Bacon Mega Rockets. Whenever he was alone, Billy would put on his brother's football helmet and he transformed himself into Commander Keen. Keen went on to have 6 episodes and 1 lost episode that Softdisk published. The series became a hit, and the characters from the series become famous in the industry. Most notably is the Dopefish, an enemy from the 4th episode. He still makes appearances today, even as recent as Deus Ex Human Revolution. Before id could focus on its own title, they needed to fulfill their contract with Softdisk. Those games included Rescue Rover 1 and 2 and Shadow Knights, but it would be the next 2 games, Hover Tank 3D and Catacomb 3D, that would set the stage for id's next full-fledged game. Released in 1992, Wolfenstein 3D is considered to be one of the leaders in popularizing and creating the general mold for the first-person shooter. With Carmack's programming achievements in the Catacomb 3D engine, id decided to rework a 1981 Apple II game called Castle Wolfenstein. The initial concept of the game stayed true to the original by incorporating many stealth aspects such as hiding bodies and swapping uniforms, but these ideas were dropped because it just complicated the overall experience. The initial plan was to create one shareware episode and then allow gamers to buy the full trilogy. This was the same model used in the Commander Keen series, and it was very profitable. As it turned out, it was a great strategy because the game sold over 100,000 units by the end of 1993 and resulted in a much higher profit margin than its retail prequel, Spear of Destiny. Carmack was inspired to create the Wolfenstein 3D engine when he saw a tech demo for Ultimate Underworld, The Stygian Abyss in 1991. He set a challenge to himself to create a much faster rendering system of that engine. The result was Wolfenstein 3D. The secret behind it was the scaling algorithms he used. This was enabled the engine to also run on relatively weak hardware. The Wolfenstein 3D has received generally high praise. It was also one of the early games to create controversy in the world. Because of the use of Nazi symbols such as the swastika and the use of the Nazi Party theme song as the game's music, the PC version was withdrawn from store shelves in Germany in 1994. This also happened to the Atari Jaguar version later that year. Nintendo decided, in an attempt to avoid bad press, to censor the Super Nintendo release of the game by removing all swastikas and all Nazi references, including the theme music. The final boss, which was initially Hitler, had his mustache removed and was renamed the Stoffmeister. Nintendo also replaced all the blood with sweat, and the attack dogs were swapped for giant rats. Because Carmack licenses his graphic engines, many developers were able to make their own 3D shooters, such as Operation Body Count and Rise of the Triad. But the most infamous one has to be Noah's Ark 3D. This was a non-official Super Nintendo game where Noah apparently knocks out goats that have gone crazy on the Ark. The setup and presentation is extremely similar to Wolfenstein, and there is an urban legend that says id Software gave the license to the company responsible for Noah's Ark Wisdom Tree because they were upset with the changes made on the Super Nintendo release of Wolfenstein. Of course, this isn't true. Wisdom Tree just had a standard license and decided to make a really crappy game. The success of Wolfenstein 3D and the relatively easy development of Spear of Destiny enabled Carmack to take time for himself to research the company's next-generation graphics system. Released in 1993, Doom became a landmark in gaming history. Not only did it exceed what graphics could do at the time, but it also pioneered network multiplayer and support for mods. Initially planned to be a movie-licensed Aliens game, Doom began production as soon as Spear of Destiny was released. After realizing the constraints of making a licensed game, the Aliens idea was scrapped in favor of more creative freedom. John Carmack sat down and conceived of a game where the central theme would be technology versus demons, or, as the team viewed it, a cross between Aliens and Evil Dead 2. The idea of demons flourished throughout the creative process thanks to the group's recent Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But not everyone was on board for where this project was headed. Tom Hall initially wanted to create a third Commander Keen trilogy, but others on the team felt that Carmack's new engine would be wasted on the cartoon style of Keen. So Hall accepted that Demons and Guns is where the next project was headed, and immediately began work on what he called the Doom Bible. Hall wanted an intricate and detailed storyline in Doom, so much so that there were initially 5 main characters, each with unique personalities, cutscenes, and an entire story behind the company which owned the bases, the United Aerospace Armed Forces, or the UAAF. After pitching his ideas to the team, Carmack denied the detailed stories, saying that a story in a game would be akin to a story in porn. It's there, but it's not important. Others on the team sided with Carmack and stated that Hall's ideas for push on realism would take away from making the game entertaining and fun. Eventually, Hall resigned in mid-1993. Though most of the ideas from the Doom Bible was scrapped, a few survived. The idea of military bases remained, but instead of an alien world, they were placed on the moons of Mars. The main character remained a space marine, but without personality or backstory, and many of the weapons and monsters in the Bible would stay, with slight modifications. As technology progressed in the coming years, the team would go back to the Doom Bible and implement some of its more advanced ideas in their game, such as a hub system in Quake 2 and interactive computers in Doom 3. The popularity and impact of Doom made in the world cannot be understated. Released as shareware, the game was said to be installed on over 10 million computers with about 1 million copies being sold. The popularity of Doom spread to every place that had a computer. Businesses considered Doom to be a major problem when it came to productivity, and slowed down the internal networks because of multiplayer deathmatches. Some companies like Intel and universities like Carnegie Mellon actually implemented policies banning Doom, and eventually an anti-Doom program was created which would shut down any multiplayer game that went live on the company's servers. In the 2003 book Masters of Doom, How Two Guys Created an Empire and Transformed Pop Culture by David Kushner, Doom was equal to a religious phenomenon on the Microsoft campus. Seeing the popularity of the game, Bill Gates created a presentation where Microsoft modded a copy of Doom to digitally insert Gates in the game, in an attempt to use the game's popularity as a platform to discuss why Windows 95 was a great operating system. While Doom didn't invent deathmatch multiplayer, it was the first to enable deathmatch over Ethernet, which attracted a massive following. So large that even today, 18 years later, there are still deathmatches taking place. One of the major additions Doom had over its competitors was the ability to create levels and mods in the form of WAD files, which stood for Where's All the Data according to the Doom Bible. Because of the WADs, up-and-coming programmers could mess around with a professional graphics engine without the need to purchase a license. Some of the WADs included characters from Aliens, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, and even Pokemon. There were a few WADs that went commercial, such as the master levels for Doom 2, and there was a CD containing over 1,800 WADs called Maximum Doom. No one knows exactly how many WADs were created, but the IDS Game FTP server has over 13,000. The impact of Doom also birthed the title Doom Clone to describe any game that used the general FPS format of Doom. Eventually the moniker died out and was replaced by the first-person shooter sometime in mid-1997. Of course, because of its violence, gore, and satanic imagery, Doom was rife with controversy. David Grossman, founder of the Killology Research Group, said that Doom was a, quote, mass murder simulator. And because of the general ignorance regarding video games at the time, there was a growing fear that games and virtual reality simulators could one day be used to plan and simulate real-world killings. This type of thinking took center stage in America when Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold committed the Columbine murders in 1999. Harris is quoted as saying that the killing would be, quote, like fucking Doom, and his shotgun was, quote, straight out of the game. There was also an unsubstantiated rumor saying that the two shooters created their school using the WADs in Doom and planned their attack through it. While it's true that Eric Harris did create levels for Doom, none of them were ever recreations of Columbine. Doom 2 Hell on Earth was released the next year, and honestly, not much changed. The graphic engine was the same due to the gameplay, but the maps were much more complex, and in turn higher PCs were able to run the game smoother. Multiplayer didn't change gameplay-wise, but now players could dial into a friend's computer to play online. Also, a local area network was added, which made for some awesome nights with friends. The main difference between Doom and Doom 2 was that Doom 2 was not divided up into episodes. Instead, the game took place over one large setting. After making Doom 2, id became a publisher for Raven Software and helped produce such games as Heretic, Hexen 1 and 2. But in 1996, id decided it was time to venture into new territory and develop a new IP. In 96, the world was introduced to Quake. Using a new graphics engine, id was able to finally create a full 3D world. Quake had a single-player experience, much like Doom, where it was a linear corridor where you needed to find such items as keys to continue. Once again, it was the multiplayer that stole the show, because Quake distinguished itself from Doom through having a wide range of maneuvers that the player could do. Such moves include strafing and bunny hopping, which made you move, physics-defying faster, and players also figured out ways to rocket jump to previously inaccessible higher places. This just increased Quake's appeal, because it made the game so frantic and fast-paced. Much like the WADs in Doom, Quake was designed to allow the player to create custom content such as maps, player skins, models, and allow custom sounds. Quake 2 came out the next year and had some significant changes compared to its predecessor. The obvious was better graphics, but the single player now had a cohesive storyline, with many mission-based objectives in each level. CGI cutscenes helped progress the story as well. And speaking of story, Quake has always had a problem with that. In Quake 1 it was almost a Mortal Kombat-esque scenario where warriors battled in an intergalactic arena, and Quake 2 introduced the Strogg, who are a Borg-like race. Even to this day, after 4 Quake games, there isn't a cemented storyline. Multiplayer was similar to Quake 1, but they added features through an in-game menu that allowed you to install mods. This was awesome because it allowed non-tech-savvy people to now partake in these different game types. Many fans were not positive to the changes. Besides slowing the character down some, many of the game's iconic weapons were replaced. Some said it would be akin to removing the crowbar in Half-Life or the shotgun from Doom. But despite the fan anger, Quake 2 went on to become another smash hit for id. In 1999, id changed the strategy by releasing Quake 3 Arena, a multiplayer-only game. Well, technically they had a single player, but they were just multiplayer maps with bots. This wasn't a revolutionary concept, but basically gave people what they wanted, just pure Quake multiplayer. There wasn't a consistent storyline in Quake anyway, so you never heard someone rave about the engrossing campaign. So id decided, well, we can do multiplayer good, let's just focus on that. So they did. And the end result was a game that is still played in FPS tournaments today. Of course the mods are still there, but just raised the question of, do we need a single player component if people just wanted a multiplayer? And Carmack and his team decided, well, let's just do the multiplayer. In 2004, id released Doom 3, a retelling of the original Doom, but in more of a horror setting. Carmack and his team again shocked us all with a new graphic engine. I mean, we never seen shadows or fire or detailed gore quite like Doom 3 showed us at the time. It'd also be one of the most debated games among id fanbase. I mean, one side loved Doom 3 for what it was. It was a horror shooter and a homage to the original, a quarter FPS that people grew up with. And the other was in anger for remaking the classic. Even some of id's founding members like Adrian Carmack were vehemently against this remake. It got to the point where the company set an ultimatum. Either they were going to go ahead and remake Doom, or you'd be fired. Everyone agreed to this remake except Paul Steed, and he was thusly fired. Doom 3 was id's first attempt to incorporate a story in their games. Through cutscenes, audio clips, and emails, the player would slowly unravel the plot surrounding a man named Dr. Petruger and the eventual release of Hell's Demons. It wasn't exactly riveting storytelling, but it kept the player moving from one area to the next. Many people complained about the game being so dark that they actually couldn't play it. During the game, you could either have a flashlight out or your weapon, and this led to what was being known as the duct tape model, which enabled you to have both out simultaneously. But complaints aside, Doom 3 was an extremely polished shooter, and with the use of id Tech 4, it propelled gaming into the next graphical cycle. Aside from helping Raven publish or produce games like Quake 4, id hasn't made a full release since 2004. That is until now, when id decided to take its biggest gamble yet with a brand new IP, Rage. While the plot of Doom 3 was there to simply keep the player moving, id wanted Rage to be different. From its conception, Rage was going to have a deep, detailed plot, something id has never done before. Rage would also be one of the first id's games to be more of an open world and not just a corridor shooter. Right from the beginning, you're being fed information regarding this game's world. A giant asteroid named Apophis is going to smash into the Earth, and unless you can be cryogenically frozen in what were called arcs, you would have to fend for yourself on the surface wasteland. Thankfully, your character is one of the lucky few arc inhabitants, and after 106 years pass after the asteroid hits, you're awakened from your sleep. As you step outside, you're greeted not with a Fallout nuclear world, but more of a Mad Max world, which I personally prefer. The first thing you'll notice about Rage is that it's gorgeous, and I wouldn't expect anything less from Carmack and his company. Every game they've ever made has pushed the visual boundaries in gaming. Aside from the eye candy, the world is populated with unique characters such as Dan Haggard, who's actually voiced by John Goodman.
I'm Dan Haggard, and you are one lucky son of a bitch.
Sheriff Black, who's a protector of a town of Wellspring, and J.K. Styles, who's a TV station owner whose most popular show is more like Thunderdome, where it puts the player in an arena and they battle numerous mutants.
The game is easy. You enter my little arena and the game begins. Rules pretty simple. Kill or be killed. You make it through alive, give me a good show, and you'll have your sponsorship.
From its conception, Carmack has stated that Rage will run at a constant 60 frames per second. While you may not think much of this, whenever the combat heats up, it truly is amazing just to see how smooth and fast the game runs. Rage is a shooter first and foremost, and with id's history they again nail it here. The guns look and sound great, and they feel like they pack a punch. This leads me actually to the character models. They look fantastic when they are hit. Depending on the caliber of the bullet and the gun shooting it, along with where you hit the character, determines how they fall. Sometimes they'll crawl a cover while bleeding out, or they'll make a last stand while on their back, or limp away if they're shot in the leg, among other things. One of the most memorable kills I had was when I shot an enemy in the back with a shotgun. He staggered for a moment looking for cover, but he lost his balance and fell over a railing. It was all completely unscripted, and it brought a smile to my face knowing that I caused that. The game didn't want that particular enemy to fall over the rail. I made that happen. But Rage isn't just a shooter. Remember, this is Mad Max, and cars play a big part in the game. You begin with a little ATV and eventually upgrade to a buggy and earn more powerful cars as you progress. Each car has its own strengths and weaknesses, and you're able to produce better parts for them through winning races. In the town of Wellspring, for example, there's a racetrack with 3 circuits. The race could be a time trial, a race against other cars, or a race involving weapons. Depending on where you place determines how many racing certificates you earn. You trade these in to get upgrades on your vehicle parts. The controls for the cars are a bit off, but nothing game-breaking. In fact, when you have lots of open space and plenty of bandits to kill, this is some of the most rewarding moments in Rage. Because this isn't a linear game, you're given new missions occasionally that'll take you to new areas. Along the way, you'll meet random NPCs who can give you missions for new weapons or schematics to create in the crafting system, or you can visit a nearby job board to freelance for any work available. Such jobs can include protecting a caravan or finding someone's lost booze. As previously stated, the game features a crafting system. In the world, you'll find a bunch of junk lying around, and you can just use some of it to create remote-control bombs or small explosives to break open locked doors. Sometimes you can use junk to craft, other times you sell to a local dealer for money. Coming from id, you might imagine this to be a pure shooter, but you'd be passing over many of the fantastic RPG elements in the game. From the crafting system to the upgrades to your car to specific ammo types, none of these feel thrown in or incomplete. It really is impressive to see a company who hasn't tinkered around in the RPG genre to create some amazing RPG aspects. Aside from the main story and side quest, Rage features many mini-games including Five Finger Fillet, a banjo competition, which is really just the memory game Simon, and a fully featured card combat game, where you can find more powerful cards scattered throughout the world. The game features a, if I'm shot I can hide behind this box and get healed system, which I'm not a fan of. But one thing Rage does differently is that if you're killed through a mini defibrillator game, it can bring you back to life. If you get the 2 diamonds close to each other in the center line, you'll be revived with a big chunk of life. And if you miss, you're dead. One of my absolute favorite things about Rage is that the game is riddled with Easter eggs. There are some nods to other games, such as the Vault Boy bobblehead from Fallout 3, but the thing that is about to blow your mind are the references to the previous id games. You'll find Quake crayons, Pinkies, which are a reference to the Pinky Demon in Doom, and there are even hidden rooms directly taken from the previous games. These little things that make you explore the world even more, and dedicated searchers will find some great items. While a fantastic shooter, Rage does have quite a few flaws with it. First, and most infamously, while the game is gorgeous, pop-in images occur quite often, especially if you have a weak PC. Carmack has stated that one should make sure that the drivers are up to date, and that should help. And I can no doubt assure everyone that regardless if the drivers being updated help you, Carmack and his team will release a patch soon that'll fix this. Unfortunately, I don't review patched and reviewed games. I review games upon their release, because that's what the developer feel is their polished and final product. Therefore, even though I know this problem will most likely be fixed in the future, it's still a black mark on the review. One of the big problems is people could probably fix in the pop-in images if they lowered the settings on the game, but in a big shock to me, there aren't any settings to change. Remember, id is a PC company. They make our machines cry with every release, but there aren't any settings in this game. I mean, just compare the changes you can make in Rage to the Battlefield 3 beta, which is going on right now. It's a crime, I tell you. Another problem Rage has is what it was striving for in the first place, a decent story. At the beginning of this game, you're rescued by Dan Haggard when suddenly a group of bandits appear. Dan tells you that the people from the Ark are worth a lot of money if they're turned into the Authority, and that it's a shame that you don't have other clothes because you stand out in that Ark suit. Then the bandits slowly pass you by and leave you alone. Wait a minute. So let me get this straight. I am worth a ton of money if I'm turned into this Authority, and there's a group of bandits staring right at me who probably love money, and I am in my bright blue futuristic jumpsuit, and they just pass us by. How is that realistic at all in this world? Besides the silly plot, Rage suffers from some beginning programming mistakes. Biggest of all are invisible walls. Look, I understand the need to keep a player in a single area, but this is a post-apocalyptic world. Use some rubble to keep me in or something. And how the hell can I not jump over this railing? It just takes me out of the experience when I see small things like this that could easily be fixed. Rage does have a multiplayer, but it's vehicle-based, which is so strange coming from the godfathers of the FPS. The multiplayer does feature a co-op section where you and a friend can play from a first-person shooter perspective and battle through levels from the campaign or fight in a horde mode. When you think about it, not placing a death mode in Rage might have been a calculated and very smart move on id's part. I mean, just think of all the shooters coming out. You've got Battlefield, and you've got Call of Duty, among others. Focusing on vehicle combat, while strange for id, actually makes Rage stand out among the competition. While I may in this review sound pretty heavy on the negative side, saying id dropped the ball on Rage would be akin to saying that Fear and Desire was Stanley Kubrick's worst film. Even the worst thing he could do is still better than most people. Rage does has its faults, but when the game is good, it's really, really fun. I know id's going to learn from their mistakes here, because the company is always focused on one thing: making fun games, and making sure that people have fun playing their games. We'll see what happens when id learns from these mistakes, and whenever Doom 4 is released in a few years. I'm really anxious to see just exactly how id is going to surprise us again.